It should come to nobody's surprise that the state of Illinois has had some of the most extreme weather patterns on Earth. In a typical year, the state will see anything from deadly heat waves to extreme blizzards to some of the most intense severe weather events in that said year. If you don't already know, I've lived in Illinois for over 15 years, and I can tell you that I have seen absolutely no shortage of any of those things. However, two events out of my entire life stick out the most, both of which coming from the year of 2023. The March 31st tornado outbreak that brought a high-end EF3 tornado that tore through a town that I had close family and friends in, killing 6 and injuring dozens, and the latter being the June 29th derecho. June 29th started out as an impressive damaging wind and tornado event across portions of the upper Mississippi Valley, but quickly evolved into the most devastating derecho to scrape the surface of the earth since the Cedar Rapids disaster in 2020. Now, of course, that was the costliest severe thunderstorm event in U.S. history. However, June 29th was something a little more interesting. Not only did it bring a powerful derecho, but it also brought a large tornado outbreak and an unforgettable hail event to much of the lower Midwest. In this video, we will be breaking down this event in its entirety, everything from the synopsis to the derecho itself, to interviewing residents and seeing the scars these storms left on their communities. This is the story of the June 29th, 2023 Corn Belt derecho. Enjoy. To first understand the state of tornado season when this derecho event occurred, we must first look back at all the activity in the months prior to June in 2023. When we first look at this map, you may not think anything of it. Hyperactive in the Midwest and Dixie Alley, not too uncommon for a neutral Enzo phase. But when we take a deeper dive into things, you'll notice that the month of January was unusually active, spawning over 130 tornadoes across portions of Dixie Alley and the Midwest, an area which typically doesn't even see one tornado in the month of January. February was slightly less active, but still somewhat intense across portions of the Mid-South and the Southern Plains. 225 tornadoes touched down across portions of the Ohio Valley and Dixie Alley in the month of March, mainly coming from 3 outbreaks, that being the March 24th outbreak, the March 26th outbreak, and the March 31st super outbreak. Nearly 50 tornadic fatalities occurred in the month of March alone. So to follow that up, we must have had a pretty crazy April, right? Well, not really. We did have a few tornadoes that were pretty significant across portions of Oklahoma and of course the Lewistown, Illinois EF3, but outside of that, not a whole lot of activity. And May was even weirder. In the month of May, we did not have a single EF3 or greater tornado touchdown anywhere in the United States. In fact, out of the 196 tornadoes that we did see in May, 8 of them were in the Pacific Northwest in 1 month. And the month of June was anything but normal either. Normally June is where tornado season starts to calm down across portions of the United States, but 2023's June was the complete opposite. Nearly 300 tornadoes touched down across the United States in the month of June, the most significant tornadoes being the Perryton EF3, the Matador EF3, as well as the Colorado wedges that we had in late June. So, needless to say, the June 29th event had a weird expectation to live up to say the least. Forecasting a derecho event is very, very hard. This is because derechos rely on a complex combination of different meteorological features, and the synopsis for each one varies greatly. That makes it nearly impossible to call out a derecho with any sort of accuracy unless it's on the day of the event. Take the August 10th derecho for an example. Just 1 day before the event, the outlook from the SPC had just a marginal risk of severe weather in place, not even including most of eastern Iowa being the area with the greatest impacts. And the June 29th event wasn't much different. By the SPC's Day 3 outlook on June 27th, a slight risk of severe weather was in place for portions of northeastern Illinois and far northwest Indiana, nearly 250 miles away from the main area of impact. By the Day 2 outlook, the slight risk was extended further south to include portions of the Ohio River Valley, with a 5% tornado probability being introduced across portions of central Illinois. By the Day 1 outlook at 13Z, this was upgraded to an enhanced risk of severe weather, extending from parts of northern Missouri back through Kentucky, being driven by a 30% hatched risk for damaging winds. And just 3 hours later, a rare, late-season moderate risk of severe weather was introduced for most of central Illinois, with the enhanced risk extending from northern Illinois back through Louisville, Kentucky. This was driven by a 45% hatched risk for damaging winds, a 15% hatched hail risk, with higher probabilities being introduced into portions of the Rockies, and a 5% tornado probability extending from the southern Chicago suburbs back towards western Kentucky. So now it's time to talk about the environment and the synopsis leading up to the event of June 29th, and it's a pretty interesting one, so buckle up, grab a snack and a drink, and let's get into it. Currently, you're looking at a sounding taken from Mattoon, Illinois at 18Z just as the derecho was approaching. You'll notice that this was an extremely unstable environment, packing 3,600 joules per kilogram of CAPE at the surface layer and 218 joules per kilogram of CAPE within the first 3 kilometers of the atmosphere. The environment was primed for a significant severe weather threat. However, you'll notice that our wind shear was pretty abysmal, sitting at only 4 knots within the first kilometer of the atmosphere, and even within the first 6 kilometers of the atmosphere only being at 16 knots. This led to the tornado threat being much lower than it could have been if those values were higher. Our lapse rates were sitting anywhere between 6.5 to 7 Celsius per kilometer, depending on what layer of the atmosphere you looked at, so the environment was also primed for large to very large hail. Your PWAT was at 1.54 inches, so obviously you were going to be seeing rain-wrapped tornadoes, if any. You'll also notice that we had a pretty impressive moist layer with our dew points being at 75 degrees and our temperature at 88 degrees, and even at the layer of convection, the temperature was sitting at 30 degrees Celsius, which converts to about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Looking back over at the Storm Prediction Center's Day 1 outlook, you may notice that moderate risk is relatively small, and it cuts off pretty sharply. So what was there in the environment in portions of western Kentucky and southwestern Indiana that wasn't going to allow storms to continue to grow like they could in Illinois? Well, the answer can actually be entirely found in one frame of the radar loop that we have played 3 separate times in this video. At 11 a.m., you'll notice that we had a band of convection developing across portions of northeastern Missouri and western Illinois. This would eventually become our June 29th derecho. However, down into portions of far southwestern Indiana, western Kentucky, and as well as western Tennessee, there was a whole lot of convection crap. Instability is lower whenever thunderstorms have already passed through an area. This is because the sun will heat up the surface and increase the instability naturally, so whenever the sun doesn't have direct access to the surface because of a blocking in the clouds, the potential for that instability gain goes down a lot. So as the storms moved into western Kentucky and southwestern Indiana, with low wind shear and low instability, they would die just as quickly as they started. So the environment was primed for the threat of extreme damaging wind gusts, large to very large hail, and yes, even a couple of tornadoes. This is what meteorologists refer to as a loaded gun setup. This is because, like with any firearm, a trigger needs to be pulled for the setup to fire. In this event, the trigger was a leftover organized cluster of thunderstorms from the night of the 28th across portions of southeast Nebraska, southwest Iowa, northeast Kansas, and northwest Missouri. These thunderstorms were already very powerful as they had been working in an extremely unstable environment ever since they developed back in the Rockies. These thunderstorms would be the start of a severe weather complex that millions of Midwesterners would never be able to forget, the June 29th derecho. The derecho was relatively tame across most of the northern half of Missouri, mainly just downing trees and power lines. However, as this moved to the northeastern corner of the state, things started to get much more intense very quickly. At 10:10 a.m., the first tornado of the event would touch down, the Cahokia, Missouri EF1. Far distance from the nearest radar site would make this very hard to discern on radar, but it is noticeable if you look at the storm relative velocities that there was a pretty clear rotational couplet near Cahokia. The tornado would destroy the roof of an outbuilding west of town, as well as uproot hardwood trees. This would give the tornado a rating of EF1 with peak estimated wind gusts of around 90 miles per hour. From this point forward, the derecho intensified excessively quickly. Just 20 miles away from Cahokia, near the town of St. Francisville, Missouri, along the Missouri, Iowa, Illinois tri-state region, numerous hardwood trees had their trunks snapped, leading the National Weather Service to estimate wind gusts between 90 and 95 miles per hour in that region. And less than an hour later, the derecho reached its peak intensity near the community of Adrian, Illinois, after crossing the Mississippi River. In and around the town of Adrian, wind gusts between 100 and 120 miles per hour were estimated by the National Weather Service, which led them to issue destructive severe thunderstorm warnings for Adrian and surrounding areas. However, at this point, we really didn't know the full scale of the intensity of these storms. The derecho swept through, destroying everything in its path. Hundreds of power lines were downed or snapped, grain bins were shredded and rolled into fields, even entire barns completely destroyed just by straight-line damaging wind gusts. But the most concentrated and impressive area of damage came from in the town, where 120 to 130 mile per hour wind gusts were estimated as a collapsed cell phone tower photo was sent in to the National Weather Service. Not only did this show the full sheer damage potential of these thunderstorms, but it also led to the community of Adrian having a harder time getting help for those that needed it. And it was this swath of extreme wind gusts that led the National Weather Service to upgrade their original outlook at 1300Z from an enhanced risk to a moderate risk of severe weather. The derecho would grow larger with southward extent, eventually causing more widespread wind damage across much of central Illinois. And around 12:12 p.m., something devastating happened near the city of Springfield. Around 12:05, noticeable supercells were popping out ahead of our derecho line of storms. The derecho was expected to swallow these supercells up before they were able to produce tornadoes, but unfortunately that was not the case. At 12:05 p.m., a signature was noted on the velocities that was indicative of lower-level rotation associated with the supercell near New Berlin. This rotation would grow unbelievably quickly and produce the strongest tornado of the event, the Chatham, Illinois EF2. By 12:12 p.m., the tornado touched down south of the town of Curin. It continued to track southeastward, moving towards the towns of Chatham and Pawnee. By 12:19 p.m., the supercell would be sucked back into the derecho line and dissipate. However, this was only the beginning of the problems for the Chatham community. Covering this tornado live as it happened was Adam Sherwinski and Kevin Leidy, two of the greatest meteorologists in Midwest history. They both work for the WCIA news station in central Illinois. Jacob Dickey was also a part of this team out there chasing these thunderstorms as they were ripping through portions of central Illinois. But here is just some great coverage and a good example of why you should check out their live severe weather events if you are out here in central Illinois. This was their coverage during the Kincaid tornado.
Like I said, don't take these with a grain of salt. Take them seriously. You gotta make sure you are going to your safe space, making sure you have all the things you need for your safe space. This storm is moving pretty quick, along with the tornado threat too. We have already seen some spots there with some strong wind gusts as well here, knocking branches down out in the far western corners of our viewing area. So this storm is not just giving us tornado potential, but also the straight line winds as well, which a lot of people take for granted. Those can also cause damage too as well. So again, there's a new update, and you can see already past New City and Pawnee, that rotation moved.
The most extreme damage would come from northwest of town, where a home had its roof destroyed and many exterior walls torn off. On the same property, multiple outbuildings were shredded to pieces, but the tornado didn't stop there, not even close. As it continued to move into the town of Chatham, it caused your typical tree and power line damage, but it also ended up ripping off roofs of dozens of outbuildings. The 800-yard wide wedge tornado would stay on the ground for nearly 10 miles, causing over $5 million in property damage in the town of Chatham adjusted for inflation, being rated at EF2 intensity with peak probable wind gusts at 120 miles per hour. Thankfully, due to quick lead time from the National Weather Service on the tornado warnings on June 29th, no fatalities or injuries occurred. The derecho continued to produce a swath of wind gusts between 80 and 90 miles per hour across a large chunk of central Illinois, and near the town of McLean, just south of Bloomington, wind gusts at 100 miles per hour were surveyed by the National Weather Service with trees split into pieces. The derecho was reaching its peak in terms of size, and it was heading directly for me. Because these storms were moving east at 70 to 80 miles per hour consistently, the National Weather Service issued a destructive severe thunderstorm warning for my town almost an hour before the storms arrived.
The National Weather Service in Lincoln has issued a severe thunderstorm warning for Coles County, northwestern Edgar County, Moultrie County, northwestern Clark County, Cumberland County, northeastern Effingham County, Douglas County, Macon County, southeastern Christian County, north central Jasper County, Shelby County, Piatt County, DeWitt County, southwestern Vermilion County, southeastern McLean County.
Boo, modern day Davis here. Did I scare ya? So, these are trees that were snapped 2 years ago, and they're still down to this day. Now, the reason why they haven't been cleaned up is a very long story. However, you'll notice that these are just incredible monuments of what was the strongest storm to ever hit me. I mean, again, if we walk past here, you can see all this timber. We didn't put this here. This was all snapped. I remember the day after we went over to my grandmother's house, and we spent hours just cleaning up all sorts of tree damage. And believe me, it was a lot worse than this when the actual event happened. Keep in mind, this was 2 years ago, and you can still see the damage to this day. So obviously at the beginning of the video, I said that we were going to be interviewing residents that were impacted by this event. And by that, I mean me. And sure, this probably seems stupid and really egotistical, but you have to remember that the derecho was at its peak intensity legitimately over my house. So whenever the sirens started going off, I took shelter, obviously. Again, the warning was issued about an hour before the actual storms arrived, just because they were blasting off to the east. But again, the tornado sirens went off, which does happen in a lot of Midwestern and Southern communities whenever you are under a destructive or even sometimes a considerable severe thunderstorm warning. Whenever I went down there, we have a little bomb shelter downstairs. It's actually pretty cool and a pretty awesome tornado shelter. Like and subscribe if you want to see a tour of that. It was just my mother and I that went down because we were the only ones home. But we came out after the storms had passed to see the flagpole snapped at its base. It was awful. There were, again, hugely just shattered trees and snap trees. And again, I wish I had taken more photos and videos at the time, because the entire town, you could not go a single house without having some sort of noticeable damage. You would have, loose lawn items obviously blown over the road. You would have trees falling on power lines. You would have, again, in my instance, trees that fell on my elderly neighbor's house. Now, luckily, he was okay, for anybody wondering, but it was a scary time coming out of there. And was this the strongest storm I've ever experienced? I would say probably yes. It depends on what you're talking about in terms of strength. Definitely the most extreme winds that I've ever experienced. And now it's time to answer the fun question: how long did you lose power for, Davis? So, I personally lost power for about 6 hours, but it was kind of weird. We didn't lose power when the event happened. We went out to do something, and we came back, and whenever we got back, the power was out. And this is likely just because the storms were ripping across the areas to the east of us, I guess, that somehow the power lines were snapped and unaffected us. I'm not an expert on how power grids work and things like that, so let me know in the comments, but while it doesn't sound bad to lose power for, 5 or 6 hours, I had friends that had no power for days and no Wi-Fi for weeks. Obviously, everything was a mess, and they had the entirety of central Illinois to cover and fix up after this event, so it was not easy for them to fix things. But I will say, the intensity of these storms, I was almost surprised that it wasn't even longer, because you have to keep in mind, these wind gusts were the intensity of a Category 3 hurricane, or at least equivalent to it. Now, as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, the derecho slowly but surely started to weaken out as it moved through portions of southwestern Indiana and western Kentucky. However, damaging winds of 70 to 80 miles per hour were still sporadic across the Evansville metro. All in all, the derecho left over 500,000 customers without power across portions of Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Kentucky, and Indiana. Over $1.3 billion in damage was caused across portions of the Midwest with this event, which sounds pretty extreme, but you have to remember, the entire time that this thing was alive, it was scraping and destroying hundreds of thousands of corn bushels. This makes it the largest and potentially the costliest derecho to impact anywhere in the United States since the August 10th, 2020 super derecho. It is an event that millions of Americans will never forget. But anyway, that about wraps up this documentary video, so if you guys did enjoy, please go down in the description, like and subscribe. I have spent well over a month putting this video together, and that doesn't even rival some of my other documentaries, so if you want to see more high-quality content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. We also go live for all the biggest severe weather outbreaks, as well as do frequent forecasts for severe weather events as well. So again, thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Stay safe.